Welcome to Talk is Sheep, the official podcast of the Wild Sheep Society of British Columbia. Brought to you by our title sponsor, Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. Come along with us as we take conversations that matter to you into the high alpine. We have partnered with Mountain Tough Fitness Lab to help get you in shape and mentally stronger. Whether you're a veteran hunter or just starting out, the Mountain Tough app will take you to the next level. We personally train using the Mountain Tough programs, and we believe in it so much that we want to give you 6 weeks for free using code SHEEPBC. That's SHEEPBC. Check out Mountain Tough Fitness Lab. You won't be disappointed. I have to say, this is pretty cool. We're going to do our first podcast with the president of the Wild Sheep Society BC as the host of the show.
Well, that's an intro, I guess. Yeah, that happened this past weekend, didn't it? I'm now El Presidente.
Has it settled in yet, or what? How's it feel to be? Hey, I know you literally like 30 seconds after the AGM, you're getting texts and emails, and people are complaining about this and that, and you're like, oh yeah, here it is.
Yeah, there was a moment there. Oh yeah, almost right away we're like, oh, what did I sign up for? But no, it's pretty cool. There's been a lot of welcoming people from, our membership, different chapters and affiliates, other organizations, everyone reaching out and welcoming me to the club, so to speak, of people who are going to be at the good end of the stick and the shit end of the stick.
All at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. I have to say I'm really excited. We've been really, really blessed as an organization. We've had incredible leadership. Corey Green did a great job, and we're going to bid him adieu as our president. Luckily, he's staying on as our past president. He's still on the board, and Corey's been a fantastic leader, and I'm really, really excited about you, Greg. I know that you've served on our executive now for a number of years. You've done a fantastic job as a secretary. In my opinion, the best secretary we've ever had. Sorry for those that are listening to this that did this before, Greg. But you provide a lot of leadership to our team. So amazing, super stoked. Our board is chock-a-block full of great, hardworking individuals, and I'm super excited about the year ahead. Yeah,
no, that board of directors we have now, it's an exciting one. It was exciting before, but it's after this weekend. I don't know. I got a feeling, just a buzz. There's a buzz around us too. We got a team of heavy lifters, and we're going to make things happen for this province.
Awesome. So, Greg, talk to me about this weekend. We did our Salute to Conservation Mountain Hunting Expo, and this was kind of a proof of concept year. We came up with this idea. We thought it was solid. It was a risk. We took a risk. We moved to a new venue, new dates. We expanded to 2 full banquets, 2 full days of expo. We started out, historically, we'd do 10, maybe 11 vendors. Somebody said to me, do you remember like 5 years ago when we had a frickin' hallway and Omer? That was our convention. And I'm like, yeah, I remember that pretty clear. And, we grew this thing into a beast, 55 booths. The place was teeming with people. The best of the best were there. We had Stone Glacier and Gunworks and Kafaru and Fierce Firearms and Sitka Gear and, lots of great local retailers, Precision Optics, Italian Sporting Goods, Knife Makers, Frontiersman Gear, Don Stevenson Knives was there. Our Sheep Hunting University was chock-a-block full of experts, like guys that are really well respected in the field. The Adam Fosses of the world, the Ray Weens. I think the Horn Aging, they had 250 people there for that seminar. You couldn't walk in there. Did you see that? I didn't see it, but...
No, I didn't see it. We unfortunately didn't get to spend too much time on that show floor, but I heard it was packed. They borrowed my drill to plug a ram during it, I believe, and it was well received. Definitely well received.
Awesome,
and the more
man.
people checking out Horn Aging, the better.
Yes, yeah, exactly. What a great weekend, man! Hats off to you and your board and our team and all the hardworking staff and volunteers. Our volunteers, man, Kelly, Joe, Mike Southern, like 18, 20 hours a day, just and not just one or two guys or gals. It was phenomenal, dude. One for the books. And the cool thing is we're coming off this weekend and we're like, we can identify where we can do better. We can identify where we can grow the vendor experience a little bit. We're identifying areas where we can grow a little bit on the banquet side without too much, because there's something special about what we got here, right? The big shows are the big shows, right? We've got WSF, we've got Western Hunt, we've got SHOT. They're beasts, and we don't even want to be that. We're not even trying to be that. We created this environment where it's inclusive, it's exciting, but then there's this direct with the vendors are able to dialogue with their supporters or I guess customer base, and it was just a cool feeling, man. And I just got so much great feedback, and I just can't, next year's going to be insane, off the charts.
Yeah, we set that bar pretty damn high. But yeah, there's definitely room for growth. There's room to improve. And, some of the feedback we've received from people has been phenomenal. Like I can't even put it into words how much it means to me. And, we're sharing it with the rest of the board and the board sharing it with us. But every social media post we come across, it's just like, you guys nailed it. The best show we've ever been to. Like I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and it's, take my hat off to our board and then our staff. Like, you guys crushed it. Everyone crushed it. It was a team effort, and, from me just packing around mounts and building walls to, you guys doing the heavy lifting behind the scene. Everyone did their part, and it came together, and we changed the game, I think.
So I'm gonna say this now. I'm gonna stand by this. Is, ladies and gentlemen, if you actually want to check out the show, and trust me, you do, because it was freaking insane. It was amazing. It's a local show. It's relatively cheap. It's in your home province. It's easy to get there. It's the least expensive thing you can do if you want to go check out these shows. And you're going to want to check it out. I'm telling you this now, that we're going to grow it a little bit, but we have limited capacity. And when the tickets are gone, they're gone forever. So if you're actually thinking about coming this year, the day it goes on sale, get your tickets. Because if you call me a week after, 2 weeks after, and you want tickets, sorry, it's just not going to happen. Maybe you'll be lucky and it won't sell out quite as, but I have a feeling this year it's going to be, what we're talking about is, what do we do if it sells out quick? We obviously want to have everyone come and enjoy it, but so don't mess around this year. Obviously, we're literally months away. Ticket sales won't happen until early winter, late fall. But that said, keep an eye out for things, because they're going to go fast. The people want to be part of the show, and then of course with the vendors, we're gonna have the vendor experience again, and that was super cool to have that in British Columbia. It's something like we've never done before. It's a trade show that's super unique to the industry. So yeah, amazing, dude.
Yeah, it was exciting. But I guess we should move along to some other things that we have in the books here. Something happened at that show. We announced what are we calling it? The Half Curl Youth Life Membership.
You bet.
And we auctioned off the spot numero uno at the Life Member Breakfast. And that was cool to see. People really wanted to be number one on that list, or have their kids number one on that list, I should say. And it's a cool way to get your kids involved. It's $500, and at 18, they can choose if they want to continue and throw down another $500 and become full life members.
Yeah, super cool. Lots of excitement. I've got about a dozen requests for that. It just went live on the website today, so it's up there. Get an early number. It's a great investment, and our vision with this is, let's get these youngsters involved in conservation and sheep hunting and the future of what we all love. Let's continue to sort of support that, and we think this is going to be really successful. We've got some really cool plans. We're not going to announce anything, but we're going to do some special giveaways every year for our Youth Life members. So it's a great organization, or great membership to have, and then you can just upgrade to a life member once you hit 18, and we're going to kind of do like a ceremony, like a coming of age ceremony, when at the show each year, because we're going to know when everybody's hitting 18, they'll upgrade, and then they'll be at the show, and we can present them their plaques if they decide to upgrade to a full life member. And yeah, it's just a cool thing. This was inspired by Joe Appel and our membership chair, Peter Gucha. They worked hard on this, and the membership committee, and I think it's a really, really cool program.
Yeah. Well, and then along with that, in that same life member breakfast, we rolled out a couple new things there, a diamond membership and a pinnacle membership for some people that really want to throw down the cash for wild sheep in BC.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of this. We've got our tied charity, the Mount Wildlife Conservation Society. For Canadians, you can get a charitable tax receipt, so it's a great opportunity there. It's a way to give for wild sheep the things that we care deeply about. And you know what happened? We tapped out, Greg. We got to the top of sort of our list with our platinum membership, and some guys came to us and said that we want to do more. So we created a diamond level and the pinnacle level, and so those are live now too. And we'll expect that some people have already signed up. We've got 2 people signed up already. And just a great way to give back, and then also gets a little bit of recognition too while you're at it, because everyone likes to be known for caring about wild sheep. So super cool.
Yeah, that's people that are willing to throw down that much money for wild sheep. It's inspiring. Like, it's, if you don't have the time or whatever, but you have the money, and you're willing to put it down and get your tax receipt, and that money's going on the ground, and we're doing amazing things with it, and our board's doing amazing things, and our partners are doing amazing things, and it's just one hell of a team we've got going on here between everybody, from the supporters, the members, the donors, it's just everyone all around. I'm jacked. I'm still buzzing from the weekend, man. It's still going.
Yeah, you're pretty fired up. Me too.
Yeah.
Well, but before you just go on, I just want to say one thing that I also heard, that with that Monarch membership, if you upgrade, that the president's buying whiskey for everybody. So I don't.
It's crazy. I think I only had one person at the Northern hit me up with that comment.
Is that right? Oh, that's hilarious.
I walked away pretty scot-free.
Oh, that's awesome.
Guy could have been bankrupt on whiskeys. At least we held a whiskey tasting event, so people got their fix there, and it wasn't on me.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on. Very cool.
So we got another thing in the book, since we're always doing stuff here, we've got our WSRs are still running. So we have the Desert Bighorn with Sierra Alamo. We have the Oodad and Heli Hog Hunt with High West Outfitters in Texas. We have the Pronghorn Antelope Hunt again from Silver Sage Outfitters. And we have the Barney's Ultimate Sheep Camp with everything you need to wander off into the woods.
Yes.
So
yes.
Don't sit on those tickets. They're going hot.
Yes.
And that draw is where were we looking? March 20 something, 23rd?
Yeah, I think it's March 23rd. We're going to draw it here in Comox. So get together. I'll put a little mini pub night together at the Match Eatery and Public House in Courtney here. And we're going to give away 3 cool hunts, and then the Barney's Ultimate Sheep Camp, which is amazing. Now, I will say, with all our raffles, there's still some tickets left, so your odds are really good. We're going to sell more. We're going to be selling for the next 3 weeks here, but especially for somebody that needs a desert for their Fanaz or their Slam, go out, get your tickets, and make it happen. And again, support wild sheep conservation. If you didn't make the show, this is your opportunity to support us. That's what I love about WSR. You could win this freaking $80,000 hunt, $90,000 hunt. But hey, if you didn't, at least you put some money on the ground for wild sheep conservation. So how cool is that?
That's a win. It's a win. It's a win-win-win. And hopefully, someone's going to win it. And I'm excited. Hopefully, maybe I know him.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Very cool. So on this podcast, we talked to Spencer Greening. Spencer is an Indigenous fellow, very, very articulate, really cool dude, and shares some very cool perspectives and actually changed my way of thinking around Indigenous communities and First Nations in some capacity. You'll hear it on the podcast. I kind of had an aha moment when he was kind of explaining some things to me, and it was a podcast I really enjoyed. I'm looking forward to doing more work with Spencer, and just a really, really cool cat, and very freaking knowledgeable guy too. Like a dyed-in-the-wool hunter and very respectful. Recognizes sort of the disconnect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities, and really wants to bridge that gap. So, yeah, a very cool podcast, and I think our listeners are going to enjoy this one.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I haven't heard it yet, so I'm excited. I'll be tuning in on my few-minute drive to work. No,
Yeah, exactly. It'll take you 37 days to get through it all, right?
I might have to sit in the truck and let it warm up for a bit while I listen.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. So, with that, we're off to Spencer Greening. Enjoy the listen. This episode is sponsored by our conservation partner, Precision Optics. Thank you, Sitka Gear and Precision Optics, for investing in healthy wildlife and sustainable ecosystems. Good afternoon, Spencer, and welcome to Talk is Sheep. It's great to connect.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm just excited to be here.
So I understand you're over on Vancouver Island and you're hard at work with work and your PhD and everything that's going on there, and you're back in my hometown of Victoria.
Yeah, I'm supposed to be done my PhD, but I'm not yet. But hopefully after a month, I'll be able to submit that, tidy that up, and then I've got a postdoc scholarship here at University of Victoria to write a book on Indigenous conceptions of Indigenous ecological laws, what it means to harvest from an ecosystem that you have been a part of for millennia, but also deeply care about and love. And it's kind of just going to be my own musings, philosophies, stories, teachings around all of that and personal experience.
Very cool. There's a whole bunch of stuff I want to sort of unpack, but we jumped right into that. So
Yeah.
in a situation like that, so you're obviously that would be a grant through UVic, or how does that work? Like where does that system come into play with regards to funding and everything?
Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, for those that don't know, and I don't blame you if you don't know, in academia, it's getting so ridiculous on how many degrees that universities pump out that now when you get a PhD, it's still hard to get a teaching job. And it's kind of accepted that you can get like a postdoctorate and universities will fund you to continue your research, to bump up your resume CV. But also, if they like your research, then it's a bonus and you can kind of just spend an extra year or two pursuing that passion. And I've sort of done my best to milk that to write a book.
Very cool. So you create this book. Now, is that the property of the university because they funded it? Is that a Spencer product? And then, so let's say it's wildly successful and you're on tour and making millions of dollars. Who's the benefactor of that? I guess you're the author, so you certainly would get some of that.
I think it depends on who's publishing the book. I haven't published a book yet, so I don't know those nitty-gritty details. I assume that it's like record companies and music. The publisher gets all the money,
Yeah.
and you get some notoriety, is my guess. I don't know though.
Right. Right. Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll have to find you a good publicist so that you can reap the rewards of get a good contract there. But no, all kidding aside. So, well, welcome to the podcast. We're really excited to connect, and you're so good at articulating about your experiences and your Indigenous background, and really great communication. Very interesting and diverse background, and also your studies are fascinating. So, today we're going to unpack a whole bunch of that stuff, talk about what your PhD study is, talk about hunting, talk about Indigenous laws. But before we do that, let's kind of tee that up and just let our listeners know a little bit about who you are, where you came from, and kind of your ties to wildlife and your interest in the backcountry and hunting and all that sort of great stuff.
Cool. Yeah.
Easy, right? Easy.
Yeah. So for those that don't know me, my name is Spencer Greening, and I'm Tsimshian from the Northwest Coast. A lot of people don't know where the Tsimshian live, but most people know where Haida Gwaii is. If you took Haida Gwaii and flipped it right onto the mainland, so sort of over top of Prince Rupert and a touch south, that's Tsimshian territory. I come from a small community called Hartley Bay, the Gitga'at First Nation, or Gitga'ata people in our language. And my Tsimshian name is Lagod, which has several different meanings. I've come across several meanings. One is just of the heart, or to be of the heart, and another is of no use heart, which is probably my favorite because it comes from a law around hunting grizzly bears, where you're not allowed to eat the heart of a grizzly bear because they eat humans and the human souls are embedded within them. And so it's taboo to eat that grizzly bear heart. So la rod in some circumstances refers to the heart of the grizzly bear. Um, so before I digress too much, um, I I didn't grow up in my community, and that's worth noting. My mom is Tsimshian, my dad is German Canadian heritage, and they met in Prince Rupert, and then we moved to the interior, just a few hours interior, to a place called Burns Lake. My mom ended up working with the Lake Babine Nation there, and I grew up there, sort of in the rural areas of Burns Lake, and always have been in love with the outdoors. And every chance we would get, I would be up in Prince Rupert staying with my grandparents. And so that's like my connection. And as I got older, I just became more interested in indigenous knowledge, indigenous culture. It was sort of always around, but you don't really pay attention to things when you're a teenager. And then as you get older, you start to find meaning in a lot of stuff. And I really found meaning in initially it was like our stories around just oral histories around war, and they just sort of encapsulated my mind and interest. And then our language, and then as you learn the language, you see how embedded it is within the ecosystem and within the natural world. And so, long story short, I start going to university. I get interested in all these topics. On paper, I become an anthropologist, and I start doing research for my people, for the Gitga'at First Nation, the Gitga'ata people, but also sometimes the larger Tsimshian. And I start to, not only does my like passion of being outdoors, being in the bush continue, but also um, I start to see how ancient relationships, like ancient cultures, have these deep relationships with ecosystems that just unveil beautiful truths about what it means to be human and what it means to be human living within a specific ecosystem and taking care of it and taking from it. And so that sort of curiosity just led me to keep asking questions and get more interested in what does it mean? Like, what are our laws around harvesting? And what are our philosophies? And maybe there's ceremonies, maybe there's spirituality, maybe there's just certain language that we use around harvesting. And more that just became an interest to me. And so as I continue my journey as an anthropologist, I become very passionate about learning indigenous traditional ecological knowledge, as it's called in academic circles, and how indigenous knowledge, um, indigenous harvests can be very sustainable, but also at times indigenous knowledge systems around harvesting can actually benefit ecosystems. And so as we collaborate in the research world with biologists, indigenous knowledge holders, you start to see just this ingenuity of humans and what it means to be a human living in a place for millennia, and how you can live in this sort of um, at times a mutually beneficial relationship with the natural world. And so my job now is to kind of live those practices, but also tell those stories. And I'm going to milk that job as long as I can. We'll see how far that goes. So hopefully that's good enough of an introduction, Kyle. Um, Not to mention, through this process, I've grown to love mountain hunting, and my favorite animal are mountain goats, and the Tsimshian take mountain goats very seriously. And also, I've successfully gone on one sheep hunt, and I've got that, hunger, addicted to sheep hunting, and I want to go every year now, but I haven't been able to. I get preoccupied with many things, but hopefully I'll stop there and let me know if you have questions or want to take the conversation elsewhere.
Yeah, amazing and great, great background and perspective there. One thing I'm curious about is you left your Tsimshian community and moved to Burns Lake, but you talked about this fascination with war and with language. So, did you grow up with your with the Tsimshian uh, language? Well, I guess um, it'd be the Gitga language would be the language you spoke. Did you grow up with that? Did your mom foster that in you, or is that something you kind of went back and sort of became more acquainted with when you went to university?
Yeah, both my grandparents were victims of the residential school system, Indian day school system, and so my grandfather, luckily, he was able to um, avoid that till he was about 10, I think. And so for a good portion of his life, he was a fluent speaker. As he went through the residential school system, he sort of lost the language, and then got involved in sort of normal workforce in Prince Rupert, and wasn't around it as much. But he was still very knowledgeable, and he sort of fostered that by the time I was like 15, 16, 17. And then after that, I just started hanging out with elders as much as I could because my mom wasn't a speaker. And yeah, that's kind of how it started.
So, did you go back to Haida Gwaii, Tsimshian? I think I said Shimshian, but Tsimshian. Did you go back there to learn the language, or did you learn it in the Burns Lake community, or what fostered that understanding of the language? Obviously, it's not something you pick up easily from reading a book, I would imagine.
Yeah, totally. And to clarify a few things here, um, Haida Gwaii is a totally separate cultural community, though there's a lot of crossover in the cultural practices through like governance, hereditary systems, clan systems, completely different languages as though they're even more um, uh, distinct and separate than you would say like um, English to, I don't know, to Russian or something. They're very
Right.
distinct languages, which really gets anthropologists excited about how remote they are from each other. Anyways, and then you have the Tsimshian, and by the time you cruise from, let's say, Prince Rupert to Terrace, you're sort of leaving Tsimshian country into Giksan country. And by the time you hit like Hazelton into the Smithers Burns Lake area, you're slowly going into um, like Babine carrier country. So totally different languages. And so for me, once that interest started, I was going back to Prince Rupert where there were many fluent speakers still. And there's luckily still an okay number. It's a dying language for sure. But started just studying and talking and hanging out with as many elders as I could.
Very cool. So then that built that interest in it. And is it exclusively that language that you were studying and interested in, or was there other languages you were studying and were interested?
At that point, it was the language, and
Yeah.
as I mentioned, it was in what we would call Sim-Aliach is the word for the Tsimshian language, which, if you were to define it, it means true speak or true language. And again, once you start learning that, you learn so many other aspects of a culture. And
Mhm.
for me, the piece I just glommed onto right away was just this harvesting um, uh, outdoors piece that so much of the language is tied to how we use place names and how those place names speak to our relationship with our ecological or harvesting relationship to this place. And then that's sort of became the branch where I started pursuing more knowledge around just our territories and harvesting.
So there was kind of this evolution of you becoming interested in your language and your heritage and your past, and where did your connection to the outdoors and wildlife and hunting? Did you grow up hunting? Were you in a hunting family, or how did that aspect evolve?
So it was always around me, but I didn't care that much.
Mm.
My dad wasn't really into it, but my mom was. And hilariously, my dad was kind of like, I don't want to, I mean, I remember my mom like secretly going out and like tarping up the family vehicle so she could go help folks like bring moose quarters back home and all this stuff. And she'd be like, "Don't tell your dad, but we're sneaking out and we're going picking up moose quarters," because she didn't want to get blood all over the vehicle. And my dad was like kind of turned off by it. But then um, down the line, my parents separated, and I don't want to feel like I'm talking bad about my dad. I love my dad. He's a great guy. But my mom married an Ojibwe man in Burns Lake as well, and his family was really into the outdoors. And so as a teenager, that just showed up more and more. And like my grandfather, all the elders I'm hanging out with, that's what they live. That's what they grew up doing. Um, my PhD focuses on an old village site, our main village site prior to reserve creation that we were forced off of. But that village site is where my grandpa spent a lot of time growing up, and a lot of my mentors were actually born and raised there in the 30s and 40s, traveling by cedar dugout canoe, living in the longhouses, being literally born in the smokehouses and the longhouses there. And so the way they see the world and interact with the world is just so unique and different. And so as that sort of momentum of hunting kept showing up in my life, it was like, okay, I'm going to start getting into it. And then once I got back into it, so to speak, I just took off and I was like, this is all I can think about and this is all I want to do.
Mm. Mm.
But
So
as
what's oh,
I was going to
go
say,
ahead.
as just so you know, my mom, it's like we were always going out fishing and stuff, but like my mom was always interested in hunting, and at 55 years old, um, she came out like goat hunting with us. Like she's into it. She's
Wow,
always been
that's
into
awesome.
it.
That's very cool. So your first hunts, like obviously you'd go out with your mom and you guys were collecting moose quarters and that sort of stuff. But what was kind of the first hunt where you were up? Like you were actually going out and harvesting an animal. What had that been for you?
So my first hunt was a bear hunt, and it would have been my late teens, and I was spending a lot of time with this elder, um, who was a carrier elder, and she was just this amazing person, and 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 she was just talking a lot about bears and the power they hold and the traditional teachings of bears and the medicinal value and all the things that the bear comes with that I don't even not entirely sure it's my place to say this because this was her culture, but between like spiritual ceremony, medicines, and their just inherent sort of sacred value to the culture, um, it really spoke to me. And she told me, if you want to hunt a bear, you should go do it. I would love to get some meat. I love this. And so I was just like, it feels like I should just go do this. And that was really the thing that first time that I went out and harvested it with an older buddy who was like kind of a mentor at the time too. And and yeah, and then it just kept going after that. Ever since then, I've always loved bear hunting, and I still do today. And there's a lot of meaning in bear hunting for me.
Did you grow up eating a lot of wild meat, or it was sort of a mix of everything, particularly with your dad not being, too keen on the hunting aspect of it? So what did you do for a subsistence perspective?
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of stories people talk about how it's their dads who got them into hunting, but it
Yeah.
was always my mom, and it's very common in indigenous communities, I think, for women to like take that role on. You talk to women today, they're like, I want to marry a man who's a provider. I want a hunter. Like women, just indigenous women hold that role really, really well and like making sure that that's taken care of in life. And so, I mean, it was around like my mom would get shipments of food from Prince Rupert growing up, and I have memories of like bringing our traditional seaweed to class and being made fun of for eating seaweed. Um, And so, I mean, it was just in and out. And yeah.
That's cool. So now you talked lots about the mountain goat. You talked about how it's important to um, your community, but certainly for you as well. What's the connection? Is it because of, I guess, the abundance of mountain goats in your community? Is that kind of the main driver, or is it just that reverence for where they live? Yeah, there's lots of people that would say that too. I think a lot of people hold bears, sheep, and mountain goats to this high level of reverence. But it's I'd love to hear why they're so important to you specifically.
Well, I think before you even like know the stories and the teachings, you look at a mountain goat, like you say, there's this reverence, they hold this power that is inexplicable on some level. And they're so unique and magical in what they do and how they live. Uh, yeah, so that's like a given on why they're interesting. Um, yes, on the coast too, the Tsimshian do have a great population of mountain goat in our general territory. If you think of the Skeena and the outer coast and those geographies. But we also have this story as a culture where like the mountain goats sort of set us straight. And it's one of our sort of initial origin stories. It's shared with a lot of people like the Niska, the Giksan, maybe even the Wet'suwet'en, as you go to like Smithers area. I'm not totally sure, so I don't want to speak for sure on that behalf. But we, at least, the Tsimshian and the Gitga'at First Nation, the Gitga'ata people, we hold the story of when we used to live up in the Hazeltons, and people were doing all kinds of things wrong, and it's the mountain goats that sort of go through this transformation of transforming into humans and inviting us up to this feast in the mountains. And there's a whole bunch of details in this event, but in the end, their songs and their performances cause the mountains to collapse, and they sort of destroy a civilization. And after that civilization's destroyed, they lay out these rules on how we're supposed to live and how we're supposed to harvest. And there's this common theme in many Tsimshian stories that's super interesting to me and kind of opposite when you think of like, I think what your average mainstream person in society would think of like conservation. Um, but this thought that, oh, humans are supposed to harvest, but we just have to harvest a certain way in a respectful way. And it's inherently like us as hunters, we know it's like inherently human to to hunt and to have to kill to survive. And so a part of this environmental ethic that came out of the story was these mountain goats saying, hey, we know you have to harvest us, and we know our death is necessary for society, for your society to function, for the ecosystem to function. And many animals say this in their own stories too, because we kind of have stories for each species, a similar sort of rhetoric where it's, we know you need to depend on us, but here are the ways that we're going to let you harvest us. And they lay out a series of events. Um, and those often involve ceremony, they involve specific seasons, specific ways of harvesting. And then you fast forward today through millennia of practices, that's how we've ingrained these Tsimshian laws of what it means to harvest mountain goat. And so between that story and just there's also like very unique things about mountain goat where their hide is so beautiful. And I don't know if you've heard of the Chilkat blanket. It,
No, I haven't.
it's a blanket entirely woven out of mountain goat wool, and not like the fur, but the undercoat wool.
Mm.
And so it's like rolled into wool yarn and then just woven into some of the most beautiful blankets. And only people of extremely high rank could wear them. And it would traditionally cost so much to make this between harvesting the mountain goat and having a master weaver. And so you can look them up. You could Google Chilkat blanket, and they originated amongst the Tsimshian, even though they became more famous up in the Chilkat area in the southeast Alaska. Um, but that was like one aspect. And also their horns are like used for spoons the most decorated spoons, and you see these things in like people's households that come from a long time ago, beautifully carved goat horn spoons. And there's just like that artistic piece, there's the historical story piece, and then there's this spiritual piece of like, okay, mountain goat's one of the only animals where we're told we have to follow these ceremonies in order to hunt it. And so there's this majesticness in the whole process as a Tsimshian person. Also, it's kind of like it's almost like they're off limits until you do an immense amount of training, which is something I kind of want to talk about is just this sort of accountability to being a good person and a good harvester in order to be allowed to harvest goats or prized animals. That is just this law and ethic in at least my indigenous community, but I've heard it many places. So long story short, all those things combined is what brought me into my interest in mountain goats and mountain hunting.
Super cool. Let's talk about these sort of um, ancient laws, these laws that have been around from for the longest time. Has there been an evolution in it? I'm sure the root of the law is similar. Is there like written laws now? Is it all word of mouth? So let's talk about maybe the history of that and what are some of those rules? Like you talked about being in a uh, worthy of being able to harvest, sort of you've gone through the training, so what does that involve? I'm curious. Of course there's the nanny versus billy issue. They want us harvesting billies. Is that something that you guys adhered to, or do adhere to? And then I'm also curious about harvests, how much you can harvest and that sort of stuff. So I'd love to dive into all that stuff and get a perspective on that, Spencer, if you could.
Yeah, and I'll preface this with like I think listeners need to understand that we can't romanticize that all hunters have access to this knowledge, all indigenous hunters.
Mhm.
The Canadian system actively removed us from our territories and stripped away the language and the knowledge and the governance systems and the education systems that allowed for people to learn this. I am extremely privileged in that my village is very remote. It's only accessible by boat or seaplane. And so many of our elders just missed that system and grew up in this. But it's very complex, and there's this juggling act of how do we honor these systems, continue to teach them, but also revive them in other communities where they were hit harder by colonization, by residential school, by urbanization, by all these things that are very complex and nuanced. So I'll preface with that, um, but also emphasizing that these are things that I do practice, and it's my goal to pass these teachings and this knowledge down to the younger generation. And so, I mean, I can sort of start for our listeners for um, who won't know, but I passed this chapter of my thesis on to Kyle that I hope to publish in an academic journal soon. I sort of lay out some of these laws, even though with journals you have a word count maximum, and so I can't lay all of them out. But I'll try to go through some of those that might be of interest. So one of the first laws that I think people find is interesting is our mountain goat hunting season, which is usually September, um, and then like March, late winter, early spring. And so the reason that it sort of goes through middle of fall, we rarely harvest as it gets close to the rut. But we want to harvest before the rut because fat is so, there's a few reasons. First one, fat is so highly prized by the Tsimshian people. Mountain goat fat, um, when I get it, I try to jar it because it's just so valuable. The way you use it for food, you use it for spiritual practices, for offerings, for all kinds of things. In many of our stories, there's deep meaning and importance of offering mountain goat fat to different areas on the ocean. And it's said that beings under the water, this we have a name for them. We call them noch noch, but the beings under the water that cause weather changes, that can cause disaster, they crave mountain goat fat. And so to kill a goat um, at a time this kind of contradicts the later season of March, but to kill a goat at this time in the fall and not to take the fat is just an absolute no-no. It's worse than, what's the waste not laws that
Hmm.
residents would have? It's worse than that in our eyes. To leave meat in the bush, you would never leave fat, mountain goat fat. So that's one reason. Another reason in the fall is right before like the billies sort of corral up with the nannies, for a lack of better word. They're like the billies are sort of hanging out together, right? They're doing their thing. And if you study an area, you can really nail down the billies on what they're doing. And my elders have always taught me that this importance of harvesting young billies, young males. And there's a few things going on there. Um, Back to the fact that the billies are sort of grouping together. Um, when they do that, they kind of have their own billy sort of trail networks that the nannies aren't sort of engaging in. The nannies have their own trail works, and the billies are sort of going back and forth, cruising, looking for the nannies that'll accept them. But they have their own billy trail networks. And in the fall and in the winter, you can almost nail down those trails and treat them as a trap line. And so one thing I kind of allude to in that chapter, which again I don't think I had enough time to talk or word space to talk about, is how often mountain goat hunting is almost like working a trap line for the Tsimshian. And of course, that's changed today how we use rifles and if you want archery. But prior to rifles, often it was mountain goats were harvested via snare on these billy trap lines, or um, you'd wait for them, wait literally above them on these trap lines, so on a cliff or something, and spear them from above or push them right off a cliff. And so you're working this billy trap line as a conservation ethic. And the reason being is because nannies are obviously going to mate with an older billy, and you didn't want to disrupt the dynamic of those older billies. And so this was sort of knowledge that was passed down. And interestingly, in a few years ago, there was an archaeological study done in the Prince Rupert Harbor, and they dug up this site that was just full of mountain goat bones. It ended up the vast majority of those bones were from young billies. And so it's cool just to see these teachings align with the archaeological report. And so that's another piece of this sort of fall hunt. Um, Another aspect of this is there's this very prized alpine berry, the alpine blueberry, that elders just crave. And so it's like if you're going for goats, go mid-September or something so you can get that berry too. Mid to late September, early October maybe, um, depending on the area, to get that berry for the elders. And so that's kind of our season. And yeah, I, that's our fall season. You go to the winter, often elders have told me the only other time we harvested goats was right before the Ulican run. And it's kind of like you've been starved of meat all through the winter. And so you're just craving meat. For us, I was going to say the Ulican run is the new year, but then I realized people might not even know what the Ulican is. The
Yeah, I don't. So yeah, fill me
Okay,
in.
great.
Yeah.
So the Ulican is this fish. Um, you might hear him ooligan, hooligans, or ulican, or candlefish. They're this fish that was of huge importance on the coast because they showed up at like right at the end of winter, and they were packed full of nutrients and super oily. And so we would make oil out of them. The reason they're called candlefish is you can dry them and light them on fire and they'll act like a candle. And so that was this first big, like after this winter of potential starvation, you're excited for Ulican. But also, the mountain goats are moving away from the nannies again because they're done their winter mating. Or sorry, the billies are moving away from the nannies. And they're back on these like billy trapline networks. And so you can target mountain goat again on those sort of trapline networks. And it timed well with like the one reason we'd harvest these billies um, is to sort of bring in the new year because we haven't had meat. And even though they don't have much fat, they'll still have that underlayer, that coat that we would use for chilcat blankets. Um, and so that was another special time to go get them, sort of late winter, early spring.
Wow.
So that's some of the laws on harvesting season.
Let's talk a little bit about being fit to do it. So it's interesting. You talked about the trap line and Billy trap line and spearing them. So okay, so now you're on a cliff. There's a goat on a trail on a cliff, and you're going to jump off and spear them from above. So that's insane. So let's talk a little bit. Obviously you had to be incredibly good at what you're doing. You had to be fit,
Yeah,
and there probably was a lot of injury and possibly mortality doing it as well.
totally. Yeah, people talk about that. And so this ties into the importance of like being an introspective, thoughtful person around like the ceremony and the training that gets involved with hunting. So this is the other law. The fact that my elders didn't let me go goat hunting for years. They just always discourage it and just like it felt like, what do you mean you don't even want mountain goat meat? Or like, why are you not letting me do this? I was thinking like, you think I'm that dumb, that stupid? Like, why aren't you letting me go? And it was this they needed to make sure that I was mentally good enough to go mountain goat hunting. And so something we should hopefully talk about is just this difference where like any jackass can get a mountain goat tag and they don't need to care about the species. They don't need to care about that place. They can just go harvest a mountain goat. And I understand there's nuance of like how hard it would be to gauge a person's emotional well-being around mountain goats provincially, let alone internationally, when you got people coming with mountain goat tags. But it's just this ethic, and like on a philosophical level, it's neat to think about. And so for me, a part of like ceremonies, which often involve um, strict fasting um, for days, whether it's sometimes just food fasting, sometimes it's food and water for many days. Um, Sometimes it's a strict diet of specific medicines you're allowed to harvest, and you need to know how to harvest those medicines, how to ingest them because they can be dangerous, and all this sort of introspective ceremony that forces you to control your mind. A lot of like cold water bathing, spiritual bathing in the winter time at glacier waterfalls and things like that. All of that is just to strengthen one's mind, let alone the physical piece of training. And so any accomplished like hunter will know how important it is to be able to control your mind in intense situations. And that was kind of this law that you needed to do this before you were allowed to go mountain goat hunting. An interesting tidbit is traditionally, when it came to our hereditary chiefs, you weren't even allowed to be a hereditary chief unless you engaged in years of that. So imagine how neat it would be if our political representatives were like forced to do therapy and like introspective emotional work for decades before they could actually run for office. That's
That'd be a
kind of
game
what,
changer.
yeah, totally. And that's kind of what our system requires for mountain goat hunters, but also chiefs. So that was this other piece of it. I'm sorry if I digressed. I'll let you ask questions if you have.
No, no, it's this is amazing. Just one, I'm curious. Would the elders be the ones to approve sort of a hunter to go and harvest? Would they be the ones, or would it be your family, or who would make that decision on who could go mountain goat hunting?
Yeah, both
Okay.
elders and family. Also, a piece of this um, that is important that I'll explain for our listeners is when you think of Tsimshian territory, or for Hartley Bay, the Gitga'at First Nation, even thinking of our territory, you have to understand our governance system to understand on like who's calling the shots on when and where to harvest. So for simplicity, um, this is very simplistic. I'm dumbing it down because otherwise it would probably just sound like gobbledygook. But think of anywhere on the map, but I'm talking about Hartley Bay. And you're kind of on the mainland, but there's also coastal fjords. And behind those coastal island fjords is like Haida in Japan is next stop. So you have all these different watersheds amongst the mainland, amongst those islands. And generally, different clans will have different ownership or stewardship over those islands. And the different hereditary representatives of those clans will generally be people who grew up harvesting there, trapping there. Their trap lines are usually there, and have this in-depth knowledge of that place. Well, they're the ones that would call the shots. And so I often ask people to imagine how BC is carved into like voting districts. You can imagine our hereditary clan system carved up in a similar way, where this island or this district is owned by this person's clan, and the chiefs and the representatives are these people, and they call those shots because they know that watershed. It also, all those clans kind of come together within a governmental institution that most people would know as the potlatch. And so you can imagine it, it's kind of a very bastardized analogy, but imagine Parliament where all our people come together, there's Senate, there's all these things happening. That's what the potlatch enables for us. Side note, that was made illegal and you were arrested if you participated in it for a whole bunch of years, which is another way people were removed from their territories in Canada, in British Columbia. But today it's legal. And when you hear of hereditary systems, clan systems, potlatching, that's that system. And so these places where I hunt mountain goats, I'd be in ongoing conversation with the elders who steward that area. And as a mountain goat hunter, I would also be out there acting as like, on some level, like a biologist who monitors the area. I'm making regular trips. I'm talking with the elders saying the goats are doing this fall. In the winter, they did this. In the spring, they're doing this. What are your thoughts? Should we harvest one this coming fall? And from there, that's when the elders would say, okay, I think you could take 2 billies. Or okay, I think you could take one, and we'll let that watershed rest for a bit and move to this watershed for next year. And so those are the conversations that happen around the stewardship and the harvest of mountain goats.
Very cool. So that's when we talk about modern day traditional ecological knowledge, is that kind of that piece? Like, I guess some of that's, I guess they'd have that rooted history as the chief, hereditary chief, or the elder, sorry. And then you'd be out there, I guess, as the modern day biologist reporting back and using that to make decisions for the harvest in the community.
Yeah, this is all traditional ecological knowledge, from everything from like understanding these billy goat dynamics where we harvest almost like a trap line, to who's governing and how we're making those decisions on when to harvest, to like what we would call science today was traditional ecological knowledge or indigenous science that hopefully I can pass down to the youth in Hartley Bay.
Okay, very cool. So now, would what was the, like, in your community, what was the main sustenance? Was it mostly fish, or obviously you're on the ocean there, so is it mostly fish, and then you'd supplement it with goat? And was the goat harvested? Obviously, we know it's harvested for the wool, it's harvested for the fat, and I know obviously all would be used the meat and everything.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
was there something specifically that was really prized after, or you even talked about the horns being used for like as spoons and such, right? So
Yeah, I mean, outside of the meat, that was also very prized. It was like, well, like I laid out, the fat was extremely important, and all those ceremonial items, um, were were very sought after, um, in the Tsimshian world, and it was a very big statement to be able um, to have those items, to do those things. Another interesting piece about Tsimshian culture and people is our conception of wealth. Um, our conception of wealth is kind of like if you took Western society's idea of accumulation in wealth and flipped it on its head. Where in the potlatch system, when you debate politics or figure out disagreements and stuff, it's also whoever's hosting, it's their job to give out um, resources. And in our world, the more you've given out in your lifetime, the more prestigious of a person you are. And it's funny that in one sense, like you have this human group, this human culture that have developed over millennia that this is our conception of wealth and it's worked for us. And then you fast forward to like modern society and it's like, well, this is our conception. And clearly it's taking us in a different place of like individualism and greed and insustainability and like potentially taking society down in to hell in a handbasket. And both conceptions of wealth have like driven their own trajectory of a culture for millennia. But for us, it's been like if you're the wealthiest person, you're giving this stuff away as much as you can. And in turn, people respect you and they often give things to you as well. And so, an example of this, there's people who always just are feasting and helping out the community. I know when I catch a spring salmon, I'm going to give my first spring salmon to that person, no questions asked. And many other people in the village are doing that. Chances are they'll be putting that aside for their potlatch anyways, but also they're like, it's this gift economy. If people really, there's this amazing book by, I think it's called Sacred Economics. And I think I cited in that Mountain Goat chapter by Charles Eisenstein. And it's about gift economies. He doesn't mention indigenous people, I don't think, but it's very, very much like an indigenous way of thinking about wealth. Anyways, it's a bit of a digression. All that to say, to be able to give out mountain goat was extremely prestigious because you needed to be, one, very good at what you're doing in order to spear or like snare and kill a mountain goat. That's just like, to think of me doing that today, it's mind-blowing. Though maybe I'll get to try it in this lifetime. We'll see. Not anytime soon, though. I'm still hunting with a rifle. And so that in itself is like to feast many, many people and have enough mountain goat to do that. It was special. Also, while knowing you can't over harvest. And so it might have taken years to save up that much mountain goat. But yeah, like you say, we lived on the coast, so the mainstays of our diet was totally salmon. And amongst that salmon, you're getting shellfish, um, seabirds, ducks. Within the last 100 years, we've had moose, lots of deer, and then yeah, all the seafood you can think of.
Mm.
So mountain goats were just unique and special in their own way.
Yeah. So with regards to, you talked about a lot of the times it'd be the females that would be into hunting or going out. Was that the case with their females that would be going out and killing these goats, like jumping off the cliffs and harvesting, or was it is that more of a modern thing, or was it pretty prevalent in
I'll
your
try to clarify my thought.
okay.
The females are always encouraging harvesting and they're always processing and they're like the head of the household when it comes to hunting camp.
Right.
But generally, these dangerous tasks were given to men because we were disposable.
Right.
And so I haven't been given like any other explanation other than that is that maybe every now and then there was a female alpine hunter, but traditionally, like life was pretty tough and
Right.
dangerous. And so you don't want to lose women. They're the life givers of the community and they were extremely valued. And so when even things like messengers to neighboring communities, you never send women as a messenger um, because of that same reason.
Right.
But
Right.
today, I'm sure there's more women out hunting and but that sort of moral that my mom held was more of being like wanting wild game and food in the household and being the sort of head of the household when it came to that part.
Yeah, very cool. So are there stories that have been passed down, or are you familiar with any uh obviously it was a very dangerous thing if well, I guess probably the snaring was a little less dangerous, but obviously if the animal wasn't dead, you'd have to dispatch it. But certainly jumping off and spearing it, that would be incredibly treacherous. So were there stories of, and obviously there was mortality clearly with weather and avalanches and snowfall and 100 other things. It was obviously very difficult to harvest a billy in those conditions.
Yeah, there was totally mortality, and that's why I think not only out of respect for the animals did the elders want to make sure you were good in the mind, but also out of respect for your family. Um, because I've been out in the bush where it's you see people when they crack and they start to freak out, and that's when accidents happen, especially in the Alpine. And so, yeah, I mean, I in our community, no one's uh, talked about that hasn't happened in quite a while where there was a death or something due to an alpine hunt, but people talk about like obviously it happened in those stories that the like fear from those stories is passed down and whatnot.
Hmm. So Spencer, these rules that existed for the longest time, are those rules still in modern day place? Do they still vet uh, people that are going to go out and harvest? And obviously that there's some sort of level of harvest limit and that sort of stuff. But do they still have these strict rules about who can and can't go? Obviously, with modern equipment and with firearms and things, it's obviously not quite as challenging to harvest an animal, but they still have these rules around it.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I said, due to this undeniable fact that you have this culture where so much knowledge was taken away and attempted to be sort of removed and destroyed through assimilation, that not everyone has access to this knowledge.
Mm.
And so it's kind of this thing where some people have been privileged to have this knowledge. And so you share it when you can. And people are interested in learning, especially the young generation. And so if your village, you can pass it on in your village, but if you know if another village is hungry for that, you do your best to share it with them. And in the meantime, there is this like awkward growing pain of like getting back into it in many cases where you can, yeah, you can imagine, like, I know in my community, there's people who have harvested mountain goats that weren't in the same like rigorous, demanding sort of study that I was put through by my elders, but it was because I was privileged to have this gang of elders always at my back. And so that person would show up in the village with a mountain goat, and maybe then the elders are like, "Hey, did you think of this? Did you do this? Like, where was this?" And harvesting that information afterwards to ensure that they can incorporate that into their repertoire of knowing what conservation decisions they should make moving forward with the hunting season, but also to be like, okay, this kid wants to be a goat hunter. Maybe we should give them more teachings. Again, Hartley Bay is a small community. It's very remote. And so it's very easy for the entire community to be involved and know what's going on. In bigger communities that are like have maybe been affected by colonization more, they're more individualized. The hope is that that relationship is being repaired around these traditional systems while also encouraging um, new young hunters to maintain these traditions. And so it's just like it's very nuanced in that degree of do people follow these laws is like a scale where it changes everywhere you go. But I guarantee you, every indigenous community you go to, there's cultural researchers, there's people bringing back these practices if they're not currently being practiced, and they're being encouraged. And that's for indigenous people, like this kind of research and this kind of remembering of knowledge is so important and very prized. And yeah, it's not like people don't want to be doing this.
So we talk a little bit about assimilation and colonization and sort of this lost culture, your lost indigenous culture. In your personal experience in your community, are you seeing that strengthen now compared to say even when you were a young man, like as a child? So does it seem more prevalent now and more of a connection with your indigenous history than there was in the short, 20, 30 years that you've been sort of had it experienced it yourself?
For sure. Yeah. it's like there's been this momentum, I would say, since the 50s, 60s. Back in the 50s, I forget what year, but it was like illegal for quote unquote an Indian to get a lawyer or to engage in any sort of political meeting or even leave the reserve without a pass or something. And so you're very restricted in your own autonomy at that point. And then as like indigenous people go to university, become lawyers, they start to combine these knowledge systems where they have traditional upbringings, but also know how to weave in and out of Canadian law, let's say. And so um, that starts to come out into mainstream society as more indigenous people are becoming political, becoming educated, and it sort of has snowballed since then. And I would say a huge turning point has been like several court cases throughout the 90s that recognize indigenous sovereignty and rights and title. And then in 2010, when Idle No More happened, I don't know if you remember that or
No, I
familiar with the
don't know.
term. There was a lot of political momentum, and like it was just indigenous people clashing with the federal government at the time. And so there's a huge momentum around that. A lot of lawsuits, court cases around indigenous rights and titles, sovereignty, decisions around destruction of ecosystems, and now more than ever, there's like this legal emphasis of indigenous representation in decision making on ecosystems, decision making in the traditional territories moving forward. And just in my lifetime, like 2010, I remember that being a big switch. Um, but definitely it's been a snowball thing throughout my entire life.
So in your studies, you've talked a little bit about you're very familiar with it, but is this something that you did in your master's or you're doing your PhD around indigenous laws and governance, or is that something that it's just your own interest that you've been exploring those?
I guess a bit of both.
Okay.
My master's degree was in self-governance because I was very passionate about learning our hereditary system, our traditional government system, and understanding how that might look in the future of treaty negotiation or what just being self-determination is the term. Like, how can we be autonomous people that can honor our knowledge within our own education systems? How can we manage ecosystems in our territory? Because from our point of view, like DFO has manage the fisheries in a harmful way. How can we take over that? How can we do that? Because we believe we have the knowledge to do that in our local areas. And so I was really drawn to governance. And then around that time, I also ended up being on band council for my nation, doing some legal research in some court cases we were in with industry, and just sort of was thrown into that political world. Um, does that answer the question?
Yeah, so what I'd like to talk a little bit about is how that relates to um that we talked a little bit about before we got rolling here about if somebody has a status card, what rights do they have around harvest? And for you, you talked about going on a stone sheep hunt, so you have your traditional rights in your own territory and your harvest rights, but then now you're off. Maybe you're on, for lack of a better term, crown land or government land. What is your ability to harvest there? So I think sharing with our listeners a little bit about um, there's a little bit of misinformation, right? I think some people think, oh, if you're First Nations, you can just go out and harvest things, and it's much more. Well, we just seen how challenging it is on your own traditional territory, trying to get the blessing of your elders. So, what's it like? What are some of the nuances around the laws and governance, especially when it comes to harvesting and taking wildlife in, I guess, in your area, and I guess for British Columbia, and I know different areas are it changes in what area you're in, and but let's talk a little bit about that the legal aspect of it, and especially when it relates to wildlife and harvest.
Okay, yeah. So
Easy,
there's a
right?
yeah. Um, I'll try to cover what I can and what I know. Um, and there's a few pieces to this. And I'm trying to think right now on the fly how to start. But maybe it's important to start with recognizing what you said there, that there is this common conception that it's like this free for all if you have a status card. So much so that it pains me when I hear people talking about like applying for status or like applying for a Métis card because they want to have hunting rights or something. And it is such like a disassociated way of coming to indigeneity. And like there's no care or um emphasis on being a part of a community and and which is at the crux what this is all about. And so when you have a status card, generally you're from a First Nation. And when you're from a First Nation, you're allowed to harvest within that community's traditional territory in the traditional seasons and species within those seasons as you would have at the time of contact. And so it's a part of being a part of your own community and engaging in your own community's governance and management system of that wildlife species. Is that clear?
Yeah, very clear.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm babbling or not. So
No.
again, it was like this really individualistic way of being like, oh, they just get to harvest whatever they want. They just do it. It's a very non-indigenous way of seeing the actual piece here. That's actually it's rooted in nation and community. It's not rooted in individualism. And these stories that I hear or people who talk to me and like, oh, I want to get a status card so I get. It's like a very, I don't know, just individualistic way of coming to this question, this way of being. And so I like to try to dispel that. And so within that, it's your responsibility and your community's responsibility to one, ensure that you're harvesting within your community's traditional territory and their laws. And it's usually up to the nation, usually their oceans and lands department for us, or maybe just like a land stewardship department, to act as like your biologist, your government biologist, which they do. Our guys are continuously like just very rigorous in knowing how many salmon have been harvested in our territory by our community members. They're on the ball. They know how many moose have been harvested. They know many mountain goats have been harvested. And so there's this ongoing communication that your average person would never see or never hear of between the indigenous hunters and the people in the community that keep track of this management. And then from there, it's usually council or those representatives of the stewardship offices or committees or whatever in a community that would negotiate with the province and say, this is our take for social ceremonial sustenance needs. And that from there, there's a negotiation saying, well, you know, our LEH, we need this many LEH, we think this year to satisfy hunters, to satisfy BCWF. We want this many tags for residents. And that's how it plays out. And then the province decides, okay, we'll we'll try to hold you to this many moose in your territory. We're going to give resident hunters this many moose. We're going to do this many LEH and this many non-resident tags. And that's kind of how it pans out. And so the average person who at times can be casting blame on Indigenous people, in some way should be casting blame on the government because they're the ones on some level who manage this from the top, but also maybe shouldn't be casting blame at all and should be like more devoted to working within their own communities and their own networks to like empower wildlife conservation. That's an aside though. But so on some level, like you have this faith that the government is doing their due diligence, the provincial government, um, around talking with Indigenous peoples and their nations around what the harvest is and how we carry forward the management. And so, long story short, this is all sort of coming to a head now with empowered Indigenous rights and title. Um, there's a lot of talk of like co-management these days. That's what co-management is better communication and decision making between those Indigenous bodies and other stakeholders, whether it's guides, whether it's the province, biologists, whoever. And so that's kind of how it funnels down. But I haven't gotten to the point about what's it look like for Spencer to go harvest a stone sheep outside of his territory. So should I dive into that, Kyle? Or do
I do want to do that, but let's touch on something you just talked about and this co-management. So Together for Wildlife is this new strategy that the government's released, and it's indigenous and non-indigenous. It's a partnership, effectively, and I'm not sure. I know you're busy doing this thing called a doctorate, so there's a little bit of and writing a book and so I don't expect you to know the nuances of what's going on with Together for Wildlife, but are we on the right path? It's sort of just on a very high level, holistically, when we look at this, are we on the right path? Is this the path of reconciliation and co-management? Is that where we need to get to, or are we still way off the mark? I know there's lots of work to be done under that realm, but are we going down the right path with it?
In short, yes, it's better than what we had yesterday.
Right.
Interestingly, Together for Wildlife had some scholarships, and I was the recipient of one of those scholarships for 1 year of my PhD. I'm very thankful for that. Um,
Awesome.
but yeah, like this is the conversation that needs to happen. And maybe it's not the best process, but it's the best we have so far. And it's
Mhm.
and so let's keep working with that. And we had a little conference of the recipients, and like everyone was combining science, biology with indigenous knowledge in beautiful ways and building relationship with communities. And in my mind, there's absolutely no negative in that process. There's
Mm.
efficient ways to do it, and we'll learn those better ways of doing it. But as a, like that big idea, like what is the downside?
Awesome. Okay, so we've scratched the surface. We might as well just jump in now. So, you talked about assimilation and colonization, and there's kind of been this years of, trying to erase cultures. Um, how do we move forward in a meaningful way of trust? And how do we build that trust? Do you think we can get there? Or do you think we're capable of doing that? Or is there too much water under that bridge? Is it going to take a few generations? What does it look like to you from your perspective moving forward, Spencer?
I'm going to try to tie in a few thoughts here. I think absolutely there's a way to move forward. I think it's going to be complex and nuanced. And I mean, this might make people uncomfortable or upset people, but I think there's also going to be this staunch realization that um, we live in this world of excess, and the means in which we live today probably need to be toned down. Like, and that's gotta like affect our. If Spencer could wave a magic wand, sometimes I wish I could wave like some kind of ecological dictatorship would come into power in Canada to like save us. Um, Other people might say, "Oh, the ecosystems are fine and they're and whatever." I mean, that's a conversation one could have. But in my opinion, like ecosystems need protection now, and and I've kind of lost my point of this. Uh, but all that to say is that hopefully, as we have these conversations and tell these stories, there's this realization as hunters, as people who care about ecosystems, that like these other things are of more importance, like our relationship with nature, than our excess and the excess that we live in. And hopefully we take these like moral and value shifts in society that sort of um, that needle sort of goes in another direction. And that was one point I wanted to make. But also, can you repeat the question again? Because I have several
Yeah, no,
responses going in my head, and I want to make
I,
sure I'm to the point.
well, it's great. And there's so many rabbit holes we can go down, and you keep stepping in one and going down it and do a wonderful job of articulating how you feel about it. But I guess the point we were trying to touch on was just that mutual, how can we work together with years of sort
Yeah.
of distrust. And now we've got this path forward that says we're going to work together for wildlife. We're going to take two cultures, I guess, if you will. That's not a great, but indigenous and non-indigenous, and we're going to go back on track and look after wildlife. but it's been after years of sort of distrust, and how can we build that bridge moving forward?
It boils down to like relationship on
Mm,
some level, and
mhm,
recognizing that being in relationship with each other is this ongoing thing that won't end. It's not a one and done thing. And through relationship, I think this was the point I was trying to make. Through relationship and sharing story, we'll share these like values and teachings and lessons around wildlife where we can both like improve ourselves, hopefully,
mm.
as we work together. It's like a marriage where it's not perfect in the first few years, but hopefully by year 50, like things are going pretty smooth and you've got each other figured out and you know how to work together well. Maybe even by year 20, who knows? But that's kind of like all of this boils down to that. And I, I I find like when I talk about any of this stuff, and all these things we discussed today will be things I write about in my research and in this book. And so I apologize in advance if people like listen to me talk and it sounds like I'm a broken record, but so many of our lessons we need to learn are like lessons around how we relate to each other and how we relate to the non-human world as well. And so to bring this back to a couple things, I wanted to, we were going to talk about like my own experience hunting sheep outside of my territory,
Mhm.
but
Yes.
also this drastic difference that is just so glaring to me when I first started hunting, like in a non-indigenous context, which it, it it's debatable, but I would say most of my hunts were in an indigenous context throughout my life until I started hunting with Dylan from Eat Wild. And then it kind of opened my eyes to be like, oh, this is what it means to hunt as a resident hunter. And I just started to learn. And so this opportunity to go on a sheep hunt together came up. And 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 I went on this sheep hunt, but it was far outside my territory in another place for something that, yeah, I've never hunted for before. And that the reason I bring this up is it ties back to that question of relationship. For someone who preaches relationship, when it comes to like thinking about those mountain goats in our territory or the salmon or shellfish or whatever we're harvesting, that's always going through my mind because that's what I was taught to think about, is how my relationship with these things pans out as I harvest them. Well, here I'm essentially being dropped in this place I've never been, I have no relationship with, and it's like this existential dread because it's this glaring thing where it's like I'm just showing up to take.
Right.
And that's like kind of the model in some way. It's like the model of British Columbia. If you look at the history, this like boom and bust taking. And on some level, my mind's thinking, it's like, what is this? It's like the hunting, this model of hunting or just how we hunt, like tied to this boom and bust sort of thing where, people come from lower mainland, they show up and they hunt where there's good hunting and they take it back to Vancouver. They barely talk with locals. None of those resources go back to those locals, and it like feeds their people that those locals will never meet in Vancouver. And so things are just going through my mind, and I'm thinking now I'm engaging in with this. And so here's this real divergence where, on some level, I don't know what to do. On another level, I know that I've been given teachings around respect and ceremony and just cultural things I can do to sort of pay respects to those places, those territories in the non-human world. And so I do those cultural things throughout the trip and still make sense of it. We had a successful hunt, which was amazing as a first-time sheep hunter. You can listen to the story on the Eat Wild podcast because it's a bit of a wild ride. But also, uh, at the end of the day, I still don't know what to make of it because I've participated in this system that feels like it's just designed for the taking. And so I feel like emboldened to do a dive. And something I'm excited to talk about in hopefully in my book and hopefully in other spaces is where are these convergences and divergences between like indigenous morals and values and like morals and values of your regional hunter in BC. And the conclusion I have so far is, yeah, there's probably a good chunk of people that will just show up and take. And if there's no more moose there, no more tags, they'll just move somewhere else. And that really bums me out. And if you do that, I encourage you to take a good hard look at how you're taking from an ecosystem and whether you can give back to it. But then there are other ways that, like, the hunting world has produced this beautiful reciprocity. And as I engaged in this world, it was like the wild sheep, uh, BC Wild Sheep Society, Wild Sheep Foundation, like these, that's the ethic, that's the moral, where it's like this relationship that is just becoming embedded in how you think about harvesting. And so there's a portion of the hunters who engage in that and a portion who don't. And it's like not black and white, it's the scale of things. And so as I like come to terms with what was I doing hunting outside of my territory, potentially in a place I'll never visit again? Well, maybe there's ways I can morally and respectfully do that if I'm putting money or funds or energy towards these species. And so this is all just like a thinking exercise I'm doing, but I'm hoping it resonates. And on some level, like I want to lift up um, the Wild Sheep Society, RMGA, Mount, Rocky Mountain Goat Alliance, and these organizations that really hold this ethic that I see has been embedded for millennia within my community around mountain goats. It's like we're putting them first and we're going to fight for them and we're going to put our energy towards them. But we also need to be critical how that's probably just a portion of hunt. It is just a portion, maybe a fraction of all the hunters in BC. I don't know the numbers, but that's all food for thought. Those are all the like internal conflicts I was going through on this beautiful, beautiful sheep hunt where I harvested this beautiful, beautiful animal. And I'll leave it at that.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack, and you kind of got me fired up when we started talking about it. And uh, I have a totally different perspective on what I do now and what, and you drew a great parallel in many ways, right? Like somebody living in downtown Vancouver, downtown Victoria, what can they do for, they want to go out and they want to take, what can they do to give back, right? And they, what are they doing to support ecosystems they're taking from by living in these massive cities? It's pretty difficult to do that. So, I guess it's a different way of trying to find what they're doing. It's a really interesting perspective, and it's an interesting dichotomy that you experienced being there and having that internal conflict. I'm going to take something out of this community from an indigenous community that probably goes and harvests these animals, and I've never done anything to contribute to that. So I've never thought of it from that perspective. It's that's very, very it's enlightening.
Yeah, and I hope that it feels enlightening to a lot of people and something that we need to come to terms with humans, and I'm guilty of this too, is like just this sense of entitlement
Mhm.
that because it's there, I have a right to take it without any critical thought. And I'm not saying you don't have a right, but I'm saying you should be critical about this and think about it in a deep way because I mean that's what I was taught to do, and I hope other people are taught the same. And I know many are. I mean, whether you're non-indigenous or indigenous, like a lot of hunting families have like strict morals and values around hunting, but also a lot of people are just like, you know, kind of flaky when it comes to that stuff. And so, yeah, what makes you think you have the right to just because you live in BC, you have a right to go harvest this resource that maybe might not be being monitored properly. Another community might be really reliant on it for their winter food when you have access to all these other things living in the lower mainland. I'm picking on the lower mainland right now, but this is just an
They're an easy
example.
target. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, really thinking about that entitlement. Why do I, is it because like, oh, I stayed in a hotel, I bought groceries, I'm giving back to the community? I don't think that's good enough. I don't think buying a tag is good enough. I think there needs to be something richer and deeper. And again, to end on a positive note, I think like these organizations tap into that deeper piece.
Mm. Yeah, well said. Well, this has been good. I loved everything we talked about today, and there's so much more we could talk about, Spencer. And I we definitely have to have you back on, and I think that's going to be our best foot forward is to have you come back. But very enlightening today. Great stuff, and yeah, so we'll listen to Eat Wild for your sheep hunt, but then I want to have you back on because there's a whole bunch of stuff that we haven't even scratched the surface on that I want to talk about. But anyone that's interested in following your studies, following your PhD, following your book, how can they connect with you? Where do they go to check you out?
Um, the easiest way is to like show up in Hartley Bay and ask where Spencer is. I check Instagram from time to time. I'm on Instagram under Spencer Greening or my Tsimshian name, Lagoot, Lagoot .sg, I think. But I'm not very active on social media. Um, yeah, I just try to keep it real and I get cranky at it. That's why. I get as an aside note, like I just get sick of um I don't know, the ego that's tied to social media, and I get disappointed with humankind on some days when I log in. So I try to stay off as much as I can.
It's pretty easy to do on online. I'm with you. I can totally appreciate where you're coming from. And what does this look like for you? Obviously, you're finishing your PhD. You're writing a book. Do you have any time for hunting? Are you going hunting this spring or this fall?
So this, because of the PhD, I thought this was going to be the last or 1 year where I got zero hunting in. Hilariously, I had a meeting in Hartley Bay and there was this problem bear. And so everyone's like, Spencer will get it. And so it became this great experience where we have like these indigenous crabapple orchards there, an indigenous species, and it was just munching on those and a great fall bear to get. And and so we got it, and I got to like got it and process it and talk about it with all the kids at the school. So that was
Hmm.
super fun. Aside from that, I totally missed hunting season and it broke my heart this year. But I got a few things on the go coming up. I'm getting very fired up for a goat hunt this year. We're hoping to do some filming that'll parallel the book.
Okay.
And so fingers crossed if things go well. I don't like talking about things before they happen.
Right.
But
Yeah.
because you never know. But if things go well, we'll have a little like short documentary series on a seasonal harvest, and one of those harvests will be goat. So we've got some filming planned this coming year, as sort of tied with that book project, and yeah. And
Very cool.
after that, we'll see what happens. I also like politics, and so I'm always doing working in politics for my nation on the sidelines.
Very cool. Now, I got something for you. You just tweaked something that I thought of earlier that I want to ask you about. Once you have a successful harvest, you go out and let's talk about goats because we were talking about goat hunting earlier. So you go out and let's say you're going back to your traditional territory, you harvest the goat. Is there any ceremonial stuff that you do when you come back to your community that's involved with it, or even certain people have certain traditions, and for your community or for you specifically, there's something ceremonial wise that you will do with the animal once you've successfully harvested it?
Yeah, there's I'm always kind of uncomfortable talking about ceremony stuff publicly.
I thought it might be, and that's fine. We don't have to dive into it if you'd rather not. So,
I
um,
mean, I'm happy to say that, yeah, there are like things you do in an order, and they can like involve songs, offerings, etc. Which you would see in many places, like in the interior, or I think a lot of people talk about offering tobacco. Um, I've heard people talk about like putting the last thing that animal was eating in its mouth so that it has food on its last journey. Um, and depending on where or what I'm hunting, those things change. And yeah, it always involves an offering, always involves a small ceremony of sorts, and then also protocols around like how to deal with it. Something that I struggle with too is like us Tsimshian, we're very sensitive to like the spirit of words of talking, and there's this thing I noticed, and this is a side tangent, where like indigenous hunters are kind of like quiet when we kill something and do something. And non-indigenous hunters are kind of like, oh yeah, kill the bastard, you shot him. And, like it's like, why do you talk like that? I don't understand it. And it's just like this different thing. Like I don't know. That's a side tangent. Maybe it's a generalization. Just as much of a generalization as people would be like, oh, indigenous hunters waste food. Um, they kill whatever, you know. But anyways, I kind of could put my foot in my own mouth there. I shouldn't lay blame, and I should say that like it's a serious experience. Um, we're always taught to watch what you say at these points in time, and and there's a lot of like nuance that depends on where you are and like in your life. My wife is pregnant right now. And so every time I'm within eyesight of an animal, I have to do certain things. I can't say certain things. Otherwise, the animal will take the spirit of my words and turn it against the baby that's in my wife. And so there's all kinds of like nuance that depend on where you are and what you're doing and the place and the animal and all this stuff. But another side tangent. But yeah, we're careful with our words. We do offerings, and just to give the utmost thanks and obviously harvesting, like taking home as much as we can. Um, we've been taught how um, certain spirits live on these mountains, and they get deeply offended when you leave aspects out. Another piece is like deboning. I struggle with that. My hunting buddy and I took when we got that sheep. Scott is his name because we had a party of um, four people, and Scott was with me on that sheep hunt. We hauled all the bones back, and and the butcher was like, "Holy shit, you guys brought all the bones back?" I was like, "Yeah, why? Like, why wouldn't you?"
Wow.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so things like that, that like alongside the ceremony, you would never leave the bones out in the open. Like you're not supposed to.
Hmm.
And there's things you do with the bones if like yeah, um, burning them, burning the bones so like those spirits won't see them is one way to do it. And so it like makes everything more intentional and long and drawn out where like you're on the mountain potentially like smoking meat or doing meat and then also burning things that you can't take back. I've never done that though because I've generally done my best to pack out what I can. But I fail too sometimes. I'm talking like I'm super intense guy. No, man, I'm human and I fail and I like take shortcuts and
Right.
I screw up.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, those are some thoughts.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, learned so much today, Spencer. It's been amazing having you on, and I I hope we can connect again. I know you're super busy. I want to wish you the best of luck with your book, with your PhD. And so when you're done with it, your thesis will be published and it'll be available publicly online. Is that correct?
Yeah, so the thesis will be probably through like some SFU, Simon Fraser University database published, but also specifically, probably more interestingly for folks, is the sole sort of mountain goat chapter will be available through some academic journal. And I'll be happy to share that with you um, when that's public. And I tried to do it through a publicly accessible academic journal so everyone can read it. And yeah, 'cause my other stuff dabbles in archaeology and linguistics, other things.
Right on. Well, maybe once you publish and you're done, you've done. Do you guys do you challenge they challenge your thesis? Is that how it works? And
Yeah, you kind of get grilled for a few hours by a bunch of academics on what you could have done better, or
right,
yeah,
yeah,
kind of like
and then you get the golden handshake and you're a doctor. Yeah,
yeah,
amazing. Yeah, very cool. Well, let's do this again. I know I got to be respectful of your time here, but let's get back together and learn so much today, and I really appreciate it. And just a super cool conversation. And thank you for articulating your thoughts and being so respectful and sort of helping me to understand some of the challenges that some of the things that I don't understand that about Indigenous cultures. So thank you for that today.
yeah. You're welcome. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to like being in closer relationship with folks who work with wild sheep. I'm all about it.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Thanks, Spencer.
Yeah, take care.